plague. When the elders finally subdued her, it took the combined strength of their warriors and the most sacred charms to bind her. They dragged her screaming to the cave, her curses filling the air like smoke. "Bury me here, and this place will bury you all," she spat. For 1,000 years she remained entombed, the cave becoming a tomb for her wrath.
Previously on The Demon Child.
"The child! He's awakening!" One of them shouted, panic evident in his voice. The leader snarled, "Find him and place the ring around his neck now!" But it was too late. Obika's power, though uncontrolled, surged in waves, shaking the very ground beneath them. Iyanga, unable to suppress her curiosity, ventures back into the tent to confirm her suspicions. Her heart pounds as she peeps into the dim interior, expecting to see the older Obika she saw before. But to her shock and relief, Obika has transformed back into an infant, sleeping peacefully. Her emotions swirl between joy and confusion. She clutches him tightly, whispering a prayer of gratitude, but wondering how such a thing could be possible. As the forest seemed to grow darker around her, Iyanga's mind reached for answers. It was then she remembered an old story one told by the elders of her village long ago. Her voice becomes a hushed whisper as she recounts the story to herself. Centuries ago, the cave wasn't just a place. It was a sentence. A hollow carved to imprison desperate criminals who would never see the sun again. But its darkest chapter began when they sealed a witch within its walls. Ogier, the most powerful witch of her time, it was said that the cave became a thing of true horror. Ogier's crimes were unspeakable. Entire villages were erased, rivers turned to blood, and crops rotted in the fields wherever she passed. Her very presence was a plague. When the elders finally subdued her, it took the combined strength of their warriors and the most sacred charms to bind her. They dragged her screaming to the cave, her curses filling the air like smoke. "Bury me here, and this place will bury you all," she spat. For 1,000 years she remained entombed, the cave becoming a tomb for her wrath. Forgotten by time, the stories of Ogier faded into legend. But the cave did not rest. It began to change. The stone walls grew colder, and the air inside became suffocating, as though the cave itself resented the living. And then came the twisting of time. The witch's spirit infused the cave, twisting time itself. Every hour spent inside became 10 years outside. But you see, greed has a way of waking things best left undisturbed. The first to discover it were two thieves seeking the remains of Ogier. They entered the cave as young men and emerged mere hours later, old, brittle, and gasping their last breaths. The villagers who found their bodies spoke of their haunting screams, begging for time they no longer had. Years later, a king, arrogant and greedy, heard of the cave. To him, it was not a warning, but a challenge. "I will make it my throne," he declared, "and show my enemies that even time bows to my will." He marched into the cave with his finest warriors, a feast and a crown heavy with gold. The villagers waited outside, whispering prayers for his folly. Hours passed, and then the first scream pierced the stillness. When the villagers ventured inside, the sight before them became a legend. Plates of untouched food sat beside thrones where aged skeletons slumped, their royal attire hanging loosely on their brittle frames. The king's crown rested atop a skull, his defiance turned to dust. It was then they realized the curse was not just Ogier's revenge. It was her prison. The witch's spirit had woven itself into the stone, twisting the cave into a living thing, a trap that devoured time itself. After that, the cave was abandoned. It became a place of dread, where no birds sang, and the very air seemed to warn trespassers away. Yet whispers lingered, of Ogier's spirit still trapped within, waiting for a vessel strong enough to carry her wrath. At the thought of this, Iyanga froze, clutching Obika closer. The cave of Oje, the curse of time. Her blood ran cold as the weight of realization hit her. The stories spoke of the witch's hatred infecting all who lingered within the cave's grasp. Though they had escaped its walls, Iyanga's mind raced with questions. Did we stay too long? Are we safe? As the thought crossed her mind, the forest itself seemed to stir. A faint wind carried an unnatural chill, and the once serene trees now loomed as if watching. Something had changed, but Iyanga couldn't place what. She quickened her pace, Obika resting innocently in her arms, unaware of the ancient force that had once been his home. Every crack of a branch, every rustle of leaves made her jump. The villagers' warnings echoed in her mind. No one leaves the cave unchanged. An unease stirred in her soul when suddenly Iyanga heard a voice, low and rasping, like wind scraping against stone, emanating from a distance. The witch's spirit speaks.
The boy is mine. You cannot run from destiny.
Deep in the far end of the forest was Deji, bound tightly, his arms secured behind his back, his body slumped from exhaustion and injury. His shoulder throbbed where a blade had cut him during the fight, but his eyes burned with defiance as he glared at his captors. The hunters, clad in dark leathers and armed with crude but effective weapons, surrounded him, their expressions cold and unyielding. One of them, their leader, barked, "Secure him. He's stronger than he looks, and I won't have him causing trouble." Deji gritted his teeth, refusing to show weakness. He had fought valiantly to protect Iyanga and Obika, but the odds had been against him. As they dragged him through the forest, his mind raced, searching for a way to escape. The hunters moved swiftly through the forest, their footsteps deliberate and silent. The leader carried an air of confidence, gripping the ring they had intended for Obika. This ring, a symbol of control and submission, was now meant for a different purpose. The goal now was Deji as bait to lure the boy and his mum. One of the hunters hesitated, glancing nervously at Deji. "Do we even know what we're dealing with? That boy, he's no ordinary child. It seems like all forces of nature are in his control. How can we defeat such a person?" The leader silenced him with a glare. "Our mission isn't to question. The boy is a weapon, and the kingdoms will pay handsomely to control him. This one," he gestured to Deji, "will ensure the mother and child follow us." As they trekked deeper into the forest, an unsettling silence began to envelop them. The chirping of birds faded, and the rustling leaves seemed to whisper secrets in the wind. The hunters exchanged uneasy glances, but pressed on. Deji, despite his predicament, noticed their unease. "The forest doesn't like you," he said with a weak smile, his voice laced with defiance. One hunter raised his spear, anger flaring in his eyes. "Keep quiet, or I'll poke your heart and feed you to the vultures." "Enough!" the leader snapped. "Save your strength. The boy and his mother are the real threat." But as they marched on, even the leader couldn't ignore the growing tension. Shadows seemed to move where no light touched, and the trees appeared to lean closer, their branches clawing at the path. The air grew colder, carrying faint whispers that made the hair on the back of their necks stand on end. One of the hunters froze, his spear trembling in his hands. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. The leader growled, "It's just the wind!" But even he didn't believe his own words. Deji, bound and bruised, watched their fear with grim satisfaction. "You should have left me alone," he said quietly. "This forest doesn't forgive." The hunters ignored him, but their pace quickened, their confidence faltering. Without warning, a blood-curdling scream pierced the air. One of the hunters at the rear of the group disappeared into the shadows. his cries swallowed by the forest. The others froze, their weapons drawn, scanning the darkness. "What was that?" one of them hissed, his voice trembling. The leader barked orders, his voice steady but his eyes betraying fear. "Stay together. Whatever it is, we'll face it as one." As they pressed on, the whispers grew louder, almost taunting them. Another hunter vanished, dragged into the undergrowth by unseen hands. The remaining men now huddled together, their once proud formation shattered. The leader clutched the ceremonial ring tightly, his knuckles white. "This is just the forest playing tricks," he said, though his voice wavered. Deji's laughter cut through the tension. "It's not the forest you should fear. It's what you've awakened." The hunters stumbled into a clearing, the pale moonlight revealing their terrified faces. They had lost 3 of their men, and the forest seemed to grow darker with each step. Then the voice came, a low, raspy sound that sent chills down their spines. It spoke, not in words, but in an ancient language that filled their minds with dread. The leader fell to his knees, clutching his head. "What is this?" he screamed. Deji watched, his expression grim. He recognized the signs of something far worse than mere fear. The witch's influence had reached them. One by one, the hunters began to falter, their courage crumbling. Some dropped their weapons, turning to flee. The leader, now alone with Deji, turned to him, his eyes wild. "You! What is this madness?" Deji, despite his injuries, stood tall. "You've trespassed where you shouldn't. This is the price you pay." The leader raised the ceremonial ring, desperation etched on his face. This will save us." But as he attempted to place the ring on Deji, a force knocked it from his hands. A gust of icy wind swirled around them. The leader screamed as the wind engulfed him, his body cracking as he froze into a statue. It was horror unfolding in front of Deji, as even him could not fathom what was going on. The robe that was used to bond him fell off his wrist, and just like that, Deji became a free man, staggered to his feet. The forest fell silent once more, the oppressive presence lifting. He turned his gaze toward the distant cave, where he knew Iyanga and Obika waited. With renewed determination, he began the long trek back, vowing to protect them at all costs. The forest had claimed its due, but Deji knew the battle was far from over. Iyanga began retracing the steps she had seen Deji take the night before. The forest floor was littered with signs of the battle. Broken branches, footprints, and bloodstains on the leaves. Her heart clenched at the sight, but she forced herself to keep going. After hours of searching, she stumbled upon his spear. It lay on the ground, its blade stained with blood. She knelt beside it, her hands trembling as she picked it up. "Deji," she whispered, tears pooling in her eyes. "Where are you?" Nearby, she noticed faint drag marks leading deeper into the forest. The sight filled her with dread. What had happened to him? She glanced back at Obika, who stirred slightly but remained calm. His markings glowed faintly, as if responding to the tension in the air. As Iyanga pressed forward, she came upon a clearing. In its center stood an ancient tree with twisted roots and a hollow trunk. To her shock, the priest of Omidon stood there, his ceremonial robes shimmering in the sunlight. He seemed out of place, yet entirely at home in the strange clearing. "Iyanga," the priest said, his voice deep and resonant. "You seek Deji." "Yes!" she exclaimed, rushing forward. "Please, have you seen him? Is he alive?" The oracle raised a hand, silencing her. "Deji has been taken. The hunters sought to capture Obika, but when they failed, they turned to Deji. He is their prisoner now, and they will use him to lure you and the child into a trap." Iyanga's heart sank. "What can I do? I can't abandon him." You must tread carefully, the oracle warned. Your love for Deji is strong, but the child's safety must come first. The hunter's kingdom is vast, and they will stop at nothing to possess the power that lies within Obika. But how can I leave him to their mercy? Iyanga asked, her voice breaking. The oracle stepped closer, his gaze piercing. Deji's fate rests on your wisdom. Seek allies, Iyanga. You cannot do this alone. The path ahead is fraught with peril, but remember, the strength of your love and the power of your son are your greatest weapons. Iyanga left the clearing with a heavy heart, the oracle's words echoing in her mind. She knew she couldn't charge into the hunter's stronghold alone, not with Obika in tow. She needed help, but from where? Omidon had turned its back on her. The neighboring villages feared the child and would likely refuse to aid her. As she walked, she remembered tales Deji had once told her about a hidden tribe of warriors who lived deep within the mountains. They were said to be unmatched in battle, their loyalty unshakable. If she could find them, perhaps they would help her rescue Deji. That night, as Iyanga camped in a small clearing, she noticed something strange. Obika, now restless, seemed to be drawing animals to their camp. Birds perched on nearby branches, their eyes fixed on him. A small fox approached cautiously, sitting just outside the firelight. It wasn't the first time animals had been drawn to him, but now it felt different, more purposeful. Obika, she murmured, holding him close. What are you? As if in response, his markings glowed faintly, illuminating his small face. Iyanga felt a mixture of awe and fear. The oracle's words about his power echoed in her mind. She knew she had to learn how to guide him, to harness his abilities before they overwhelmed him, or worse, drew more enemies to them. The next morning, Iyanga began her journey toward the mountains. She carried Deji's spear as a reminder of her mission and as a weapon should she need it. The path was treacherous, the terrain growing steeper and more unforgiving with each step. But she pressed on, her determination fueled by the thought of reuniting her family. As she climbed higher, she spotted smoke rising in the distance. It wasn't from a hunter's camp. It was too organized, too steady. Her heart raced. Could it be the hidden tribe Deji had spoken of? With Obika strapped securely to her back, Iyanga quickened her pace, hope flickering in her chest for the first time since Deji's disappearance. The oracle stood at the edge of the dense forest, his ceremonial robes heavy with years of tradition and purpose. His staff, carved with ancient symbols, trembled slightly in his grip. He had felt it, a shift in the air, a whisper in the trees, and the weight of something malevolent stirring after centuries of dormancy. His lips moved silently in prayer as he began his journey back to Omidan, each step deliberate and filled with dread. He knew what this meant. The witch Oje, the most feared entity in Omidan's history, had awakened. Her spirit, bound to the cave for centuries, had stirred, and it was only a matter of time before her wrath spilled out into the world. Now at the palace with the king, the court erupted in whispers. Advisors exchanged uneasy glances, some dismissing the oracle's words as superstition. But the king raised a hand to silence them. "What evidence do you have of this awakening?" he asked. The oracle's eyes gleamed with ancient knowledge. "Have you not felt the change in the air, the stillness of the birds, the unease in the wind? These are signs of her return, and I, your majesty, have felt her presence in my soul." The king hesitated. He had heard the tales of Oje but dismissed them as myths to keep children obedient. Yet the oracle's conviction gnawed at his doubt. "Your majesty," the oracle continued, stepping closer, "Oje's wrath is not limited to the cave. If she seeks vengeance, It will begin here, in Omidan, the land that sealed her fate. An advisor, emboldened by skepticism, interrupted. "And what do you propose we do? Fight a ghost?" The oracle turned sharply. "This is no ghost. This is a force that can twist time, devour life, and corrupt the very land it touches. You do not fight it with swords. You fight it with wisdom." The room fell silent as the oracle spoke. Centuries ago, Oje was not just a witch. She was a force of nature. Her powers could bring life to barren lands or destroy entire villages with a whisper. But her gifts were dark, born of chaos and vengeance. When she was captured, it took the combined strength of Omidan's warriors and the most sacred charms to bind her. As the oracle's story unfolded, messengers burst into the hall, their faces pale. "Your Majesty," one of them stammered. "The forest. Something is happening." The king rose, his voice sharp. "Speak." "Hunters have gone missing." The oracle closed his eyes, murmuring a prayer. "It has begun." The king, now visibly shaken, turned to his council. "Prepare the army. If this witch dares to rise, we will face her with steel." "No!" the oracle barked, his voice echoing through the chamber. "You do not understand. Swords and shields will not stop her. If you send your men, they will not return." The court descended into chaos, voices arguing over the next course of action. But the oracle, unyielding, raised his staff, the carved symbols glowing faintly. "There is one way to suppress her, but it will require more than weapons. It will require sacrifice." The oracle revealed an ancient talisman, a relic that had been used to bind Oje centuries ago. "This," he said, holding it aloft, "is the only thing that can weaken her. But it is not enough. We must understand her power, her rage, and what she seeks." The king narrowed his eyes. "And what does she seek?" The oracle's gaze shifted to the window where the distant forest loomed. A vessel, a body strong enough to carry her wrath. The court fell silent as the implications sank in. The oracle's voice dropped, filled with dread. She will not stop until she finds it. And if she cannot, she will take vengeance on all who wronged her, beginning with Omidan. Now visibly shaken, turned to the oracle. "What must we do?" The oracle sighed deeply. "You must trust me. Gather your strongest warriors, but do not send them to fight. Send them to protect. Protect the child, protect the mother. They are her targets." "And if she comes for us?" the king asked. "Pray that the witch's wrath does not consume us all." As the oracle left the hall, his staff tapping rhythmically against the stone floor, the weight of his task settled heavily on his shoulders. He had warned them. Now it was a matter of time. Would Omidan heed his words, or would history repeat itself in blood and fire? The air grew colder as he stepped outside, a faint whisper brushing past his ear. He froze, his grip tightening on his staff. A voice, low and rasping, filled the silence. "You cannot stop me. The sins of your bloodline will be paid in full." Deji's eyes snapped open as an unnatural chill crept over his skin. The wind carried whispers low, commanding, and ancient. He strained to listen, but the words seemed to seep into his mind rather than reach his ears. Deji tried to move, to speak, but the air seemed to press against him, holding him still. The witch extended a semi-transparent hand, and a cold energy pulsed through him. He gasped as his wounds began to close, the pain replaced by a strange, tingling sensation. Deji's instincts screamed to reject her, to fight back. But a flicker of gratitude tempered his fear. He needed strength, if not for himself, then for Iyanga and Obika. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Oji's lips curled into a shadowy smile. "To guide you. to protect what you hold dear. She leaned closer, her form flickering. But remember, strength always comes at a price. Deji felt a surge of energy course through him as her figure dissolved into the wind. His body felt stronger, his senses sharper. He rose to his feet, the exhaustion gone, replaced by a simmering resolve. Whatever the cost, he would find Iyanga and Obika, but in the back of his mind, he couldn't shake the feeling that Oye's help was a double-edged sword. Deji moved through the undergrowth with ease, his movements unnaturally quick. He noticed the change almost immediately. His steps barely made a sound, and the pain in his shoulder was a distant memory. As he navigated the dense foliage, Oje's voice returned, soft and coaxing. "Do you feel it, Deji? The strength I have given you. It is a gift." "It feels more like a curse," he muttered, his grip tightening on the spear he had retrieved. Her laughter echoed through the trees, unsettling yet strangely comforting. Power always feels that way to those unaccustomed to it, but you will see its value soon enough. "You doubt yourself," Oje whispered. "You think this power will consume you, but it is not power you should fear, it is weakness." Deji shook his head, trying to block her out. "Iyanga and Obika need me. That's all that matters." "Do they?" Her tone was almost teasing. "Are you so sure they're waiting for you? What if they've fled? What if they've given up on you?" "Enough!" Deji roared, his voice echoing through the forest. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. The cave loomed before Deji, its entrance shrouded in an unnatural mist. The air was colder here, heavier, as if the cave itself was alive. Deji hesitated, every instinct telling him to turn back. But Oje's voice urged him forward. "Do not fear the past," she said, her tone laced with eagerness. "It cannot hurt you." As he stepped inside, the temperature dropped further, his breath visible in the dim light. The walls seemed to close in around him, and the silence was deafening. Then, the visions began. The cave transformed before his eyes. He saw warriors dragging a screaming woman into its depths, Oje, her curses filling the air. The scene shifted to the villagers outside, their faces etched with fear and determination as they sealed the entrance. "They feared me," Oje's voice echoed in his mind, "because they knew I was stronger. They knew my power could shape worlds." The vision shifted again, this time showing the king and his entourage feasting inside the cave. Laughter turned to screams as their bodies aged before his eyes, their bones crumbling to dust. Deji stumbled back, gasping. The cave was alive, its history etched into its very walls. He turned to leave, but Oje's voice stopped him. "Do you see now?" she asked, her tone almost triumphant. "This place is not a prison. It is a testament to power." Deji clenched his fists. Iyanga and Obika weren't here long enough for this to affect them. "Perhaps," she said, her voice trailing off. "But time has a way of lingering." Outside the cave, Deji found faint footprints leading deeper into the forest. Relief and determination flooded him. They were alive. He had to find them. But as he stepped into the sunlight, Oje's presence grew stronger. Her laughter was no longer distant. It was all around him. Deji froze as Oje's spirit materialized before him, her form more menacing than before. Her eyes burned with a sinister light, and her voice dripped with malice. "You are strong, Deji," she said, circling him. "Strong enough to carry my power." Before Deji could react, a surge of energy shot through him, forcing him to his knees. He gritted his teeth as his body felt like it was being torn apart from within. Oje's form shimmered, growing more defined as she moved closer, her hands reaching toward him. "This body is perfect," she whispered. It will be mine. Deji fought back with everything he had, his muscles straining as he resisted her pull. Memories of Iyanga and Obika flashed through his mind, her laughter. Obika's tiny hands reaching for him. Those images became his anchor. No! Deji roared, his voice reverberating through the forest. He lunged forward, swinging his spear through Oje's form. Though it passed through her like smoke, the act broke her concentration, and the pressure in his mind eased. Oje's expression darkened, her glowing eyes narrowing. You're stronger than I expected, Hunter. Deji staggered to his feet, his breath ragged. You'll never control me. Oje's laughter echoed once more, fading as her form dissolved into the air. You can fight me, Deji, but you cannot escape me. I am in your blood now. Deji stood alone, the forest eerily quiet around him. His hands trembled, but his resolve hardened. He had faced the witch and survived for now. He turned his gaze toward the faint trail of footprints leading deeper into the forest. Iyanga, Obika, I'm coming for you, he whispered, gripping his spear tightly. With each step, the weight of Oje's presence lingered, a dark shadow in the back of his mind. But Deji refused to yield. For his family, he would fight whatever darkness lay ahead.